Hi everyone, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I'm here again to interview one of my colleagues today, and I'm going to be speaking to Ashleigh Cheall, who's based in Singapore, like Sarah, who I spoke to before. So we're going to hear a little bit about why Ashleigh moved over there and how her life is different and her work is a bit different based in Singapore, but also a little bit about her journey and how she's come to be where she is today, and also some of the different roles that she does at Texel, because she's not just a broker, she has other positions. So we're going to find out a bit more about that and see if perhaps she can inspire you as well. Morning, Ash.
Morning, Katie.
Okay. So I mentioned there that you've been at Texel for a while now and you've got a few different roles. So I think it would be quite interesting to tell people about those. But to start off with, let's just focus on your job, your like day-to-day job. Can you tell us what your role is and how yours is a bit different to, say, Jake and Sarah, who we've spoken to before, and we know they're brokers, so everyone's got a bit of an idea now about what being an insurance broker is. But you're a senior broker, and obviously have an important role in the Singapore office. So could you sort of talk a little bit about how that's different from just being a mainstream broker, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Katie, and thank you very much for having me, LAE Tottenham. I'm very excited to have this conversation today. So, as Katie alluded to, I've been with Texel for 12 years. I was with the company in London in our head office for 4 years, and then I had the opportunity to move to Singapore. So, I've been actually in Asia now for 8 years. So, a larger part of my professional career has been away from what I class as home. But as Katie mentioned, I am a senior credit and political risk broker. You have probably, as Katie mentioned, heard from Jake and my colleague Sarah about what that entails on sort of a day-to-day business. I guess the part about being more senior means that you've perhaps just had longer time in the role, so you've usually seen more things, experienced working with lots of different clients in different areas, and you probably have a slightly better idea of how to handle some potential problems. So when you are sort of a bit more senior, you are also tasked with signing off on other people's work. We have a sort of a process where we always make sure there's a 4 eyes rule. So if you're sending any professional emails or things to clients or anything which is going to be reviewed outside of the organisation, we usually like to have someone to sign off or just make sure that everything is correct and signed off. So that's sort of the senior broker role. I don't know, Katie, if you want me to talk about my other positions.
Yeah, thanks. I just wondered, do you, and this is a question from me as well, because I should probably know this, but I don't. In your role, do you have to sort of look at developing new business a bit as well, or you focus more on managing existing relationships?
That's a very good question. We're very lucky actually at Texel, where you're not really pigeonholed into sort of doing one specific task. So if any broker, whether you've been there 1 year or 20 years, has an opportunity to meet a potential new client or any avenues where you think it's worth exploring, you are free to go and do that alongside some of your other colleagues. When you're more senior, you perhaps are invited to participate in more conferences and give presentations and talk about some of the more technical aspects of the work that we do. And more recently, as I'm sure you're all aware, a lot more of our life is being sort of played out online. So there's a lot more sort of webinars and Zoom calls and things like that. So yes, we are normally there to sort of guide perhaps people which don't have as much experience, but it's very much a team effort at Texel. So there are usually teams of people working on certain accounts, and we will also look at how we can strategize to develop that as well. So good question.
All right, I'm going to hold off asking about your other roles. I just want to hear a bit more about how you got to where you are today. So can you tell everyone what you studied at university, and then whether you did any work experience or internships or graduate schemes or anything like that before you became a broker?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied at Nottingham University and I did a business management degree. So nothing particularly out of the ordinary or too exciting about that. But it did give me, a good sort of basic understanding about business. I'm a big believer in actually real life circumstances are very important to sort of help you decide where you want to get to. So certainly work experience, I think, was always key. We're very lucky at my school, certainly from I think about 16, they always encourage you to go and do a week's work experience. Either you could secure that yourself or the school would try and help you find something. And then again, when you're a little bit older, certainly at university, it was encouraged. And I think I was probably about 20 and was starting to try and find out what was I going to do in this mad, crazy world of ours. My school was a little bit sort of not perhaps backward, but they had sort of set ideas of things that you would become, teacher, lawyer, doctor. And the older you get, I think you find out that there are so many more jobs out there and you don't really understand what they are. You might understand that someone works for a company, but perhaps not the different roles which are sort of within those companies. So I did a little bit of work experience at an insurance broking company, which is now called Willis, a big organization, or Aon Willis. And that was through a friend of a friend, which was very lucky, a friend's sister, who happened to be an insurance broker, and she told me about what that entailed. And then having had that little bit of experience, I applied to do an internship at multiple companies with multiple rejections, but I did eventually get lucky and secured an internship at a insurance company called Aspen Insurance. They asked me which sort of area I would like to spend my internship in, including underwriting, which is sort of a complementary role to what we do at Texel, marketing and finance, and I chose underwriting. And by sheer luck, it happened to be in credit and political risk, which was a newly opened sort of field or team at that time. I very much was a photocopy tea maker person, as many people are, but I also learned a little bit about the insurance business, and sort of it went from there. During that time, I actually met Texel at a meeting, and they asked me if I would like to consider being an insurance broker, and I then did some work experience at Texel and joined them a year later.
Wow, okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting. And I just wonder, because I've been reading about this, when you did your internship, and I'm not trying to make Aspen look bad, were you paid for that or not?
I was, just my travel expenses and a very basic sort of living wage, but enough to get by.
Yeah, because I know this is something that's being looked into at the moment, because there's a lot of exploitation of young people who are expected to go along and do these internships and not necessarily get paid or get very little. And when you're living in London, that's really hard to do. So it just minimises the opportunity. So I know that there's some lobbying going on at the moment to try and put an end to that, to make it more accessible, because like you say, it's a great opportunity to have a taster, because you just don't know until you try it whether something's for you, do you? So
absolutely.
All right, so then you joined Texel and you became a broker. Tell us a little bit about your move to Singapore then. So you started off, you said you had 4 years in London, and then this opportunity came to move to Asia.
Yes.
I mean, I did it too, but for you, what made you take that opportunity? Why did you think that would be a good move for you? And are there any big differences in your life and your work living in Asia, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. All very good questions. It's funny when you look back now, I'm not sure if my thoughts now are the same as my thoughts that I had at the time, but quite honestly, Singapore was a newly formed office when I had the chance to move out. There were 2 people already working here, probably for 1 year. And unfortunately, one of the employees had quite a long-term illness, which meant that she wouldn't be able to continue on with the role. And the company, Texel, were very aware of their reputation in a new market, and wanted to make sure that they had someone who could continue to help my boss here, William, who had set up the business, going forward. So they had a stage actually where there were 3 or 4 months where a different broker would come out for London for a month to help him, and then they wanted a bit more of a permanent solution. And Andy, the founder of the company, asked me if this is something I would be interested in. Now, it's quite ironic because the year before, I was actually really sort of had the itch and I was desperate to go and work abroad. I sort of thought that, you know, when you're young and you don't have lots of commitments, this is the time to do it. The following year, I was actually a lot more settled and really happy again living in London. But I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. It may not come up again. And if it doesn't work out, you know, I had a discussion with Andy to say, you know, can I come back to the London office, or is that me sort of done? So I was very lucky. They supported me to go. Initially, I said I would go for 6 months. They said to me, we'd really like you to go for a year because it does take about 6 months to settle into somewhere new. And with hindsight, I would completely agree with that, probably a bit longer. And yes, 1 year turned into 8 years. So it's been a fantastic opportunity. I'm really, really glad that I did it. There were certainly lots of differences and lots of challenges at the beginning. I think I left the London office and there were about 20 people. So we were sort of a quite sort of close-knit group. There were probably about 10 brokers, lots of good fun and banter and, you know, lots of events, you know, going to do things, you know, go for drinks after work and go to various different sporting events and things like that. And then coming to a place which was culturally completely different. The whole industry is much, much smaller and was still quite, well, probably in its infancy to some degree, with lots of other people also coming out to Singapore also to make their mark. So at times, I think it felt like there was lots of pressure. There was really a long education process for lots of clients where their London offices would have a very good understanding of what we do and how all the processes work. And then the Asia offices would not understand that as much. And so it was a bit more of a hand-holding exercise. But it was very rewarding in the end. Well, sort of that probably was a 2 to 3 year process. And we also added more and more staff to the office as well. So that was really nice as well.
Okay. And would you say that your move to Singapore was good for you professionally because like you say, it was a newer office, a smaller team, there was more scope for you to advance and develop your career and sort of carve out a better role for yourself? Was that a good opportunity, do you think, that perhaps you might not have had if you'd stayed in London?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I thought about it like that, but again, with hindsight, I did have a chance to really make a difference to what was I guess almost like a startup office. But with that, there are two things. You, yes, have a great scope and you can see a huge range of work and how all the different aspects of an office work. But you're also a bit of a dog's body at the beginning, if I'm honest. You know, you are the finance person, you are the admin person, you are the broker, you are compliance. You have to do lots of different things. But at the same time, that also gave me a good opportunity to see you know, how different offices work and they could be set up. And I think ultimately, yes, it probably has given me a wider perspective on the whole Texel group, which has been, you know, really, really fortunate. So, yes.
Well, that leads in very nicely to my next question, which is one of your other important roles is you're actually on the board of directors at Texel Group now. The only woman flying the flag first, which is really impressive because you're still in your early 30s. So that's an amazing achievement that you've done that. Can you tell everyone a little bit about what that role entails and how that's different to your job?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, as Katie mentioned, I probably quite by surprise was invited to join our management board about 18 months ago. The management board is the most sort of senior committee you can sit on within the group, and there are 6 board members. We meet once a month, every month, to discuss mainly how the business is performing. So we sort of review the previous month's numbers. We look at the sort of strategy of the company, where it's going. if we have sort of retained earnings from the year before, where we should invest that money, if we invest it at all. We look at things like new initiatives, and also every company is not without its problems or problem solving. Yeah, we also look at any issues which are sort of happening within the group. But I guess sort of from Katie's perspective, and sort of as she mentioned, I am the only female, and they're also the only employee under 35. So both those things I'm very proud of. And I guess one of the main aims for me sitting on the board, and I certainly still need to learn the role and my place there, but it's very much to sort of bring a fresher perspective to the management team. A lot of the senior management have got a wealth of experience in lots of different areas, but I sort of see my role as sort of bridging the gap between the sort of younger brokers coming up through the organisation, and also sort of shaping the organisation for the generations to come, because I think it's very important that we have sort of a longer term strategy.
Yeah, great. And I would say to everyone listening, something that's great about Ashleigh, because I work with her as well, is she's not afraid to share her opinions, and she's not afraid to question what other people think, which we're kind of molded not to do. I think sometimes when we're younger, we're told to just listen to authority and do as we're told and not to question things, when actually it can be a really good skill to have. And not a lot of people do that or have the confidence to do that. But I certainly think that's one of your skills, Ash. So I would say to everyone, if you are someone who's got the confidence to vocalize your opinions or to question what someone's telling you, then remember that and use that, and take inspiration from this, that maybe one day you could apply for an additional role as something like being on a board or a trustee, which we'll talk about in a minute, or some other role to complement your daily job, where you can use that skill of questioning and sharing ideas and brainstorming and strategy and things like that. It's quite a nice addition to your day-to-day role, isn't it? And of course, great experience and looks good on your CV. So hopefully that will inspire some people. So I just mentioned there you have another role, which is how I work with you, and that's that you're a trustee of Texel Foundation. I think everyone knows a little bit about Texel Foundation, but that's our philanthropic arm of the Texel Group, which means that a percentage of our net profit every year goes towards good causes, things that we want to support. So that's generally charities and social enterprises. And I run that, but I'm not the ultimate decision maker. So I don't just get given the money and give it to whoever I want. I have to present it to a group of trustees, and there's 3 of them, and Ashleigh is one of those. So could you just tell everyone a little bit about that role, and how that's quite a nice complement to sort of the business side of things that you work on?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of one of the great things, and I still think it remains one of the sort of very attractive aspects of working for a smaller company, completely independent, and also, you know, with the vision of our founders, that he has always been aware that it's important to give back. He likes to support lots of very good causes, and for a long time, until Katie came back to run and put some good structure and organisation to the foundation, we used to just support sort of ad hoc charities. But now I think, you know, the amounts of money we were giving away were not, you know, unsubstantial. And we always wanted to make sure that while we weren't the same sort of size as sort of, you know, government giving or other larger foundations, we really wanted to make sure we were making a difference. And we wanted to make sure that the funds that we were giving, at least at the outset, we could sort of see where they were going and what was going to happen with those. And so along with Katie, and this is pretty much Katie's sort of real area of expertise now, we had started to identify a number of long-term partners and charities which were really looking for a hand up and not a hand out, because we wanted to make sure that our giving was sustainable. It's not just we can give you £5,000 this year, you'll spend it, and then that's it, you can't do anything else next year. So we really wanted to see how we can maximise that on a year-to-year basis. There were certain categories where most of our charitable sort of giving falls into, which is education. We sort of strongly believe that And this is a funny quote from my mother and even my grandfather, is that you can never take away a person's education. You can take away everything else, but education is something which stays with you for your whole life. So I think that's very paramount and always worth investing in if you can. Health, obviously, without our health, we don't have much. Social impact and inclusion, making sure that there is a place for lots of areas of society which may sort of be on the fringes, and then a bit more recently also sort of the dramatic arts, which doesn't have as much funding sort of going, or not as much funding as perhaps some other areas, and can be seen to be a bit of a dying sort of area, and somewhere where Andy, our founder, is quite passionate in. So Katie and the trustees try to think up different ways in which we think it's best to deploy those that percentage of our net profits. Sometimes we just send emails and check in with some of our long-term partners and make some of the allocations. And then in the more recent years, Katie's been doing a great job of sort of asking our long-term partners to provide quite detailed questionnaires about what they're going to do. Katie then has a very difficult job, presents that all to myself, Andy and his wife Sarah, and the four of us collectively make a decision on how those funds should be allocated, which, believe me, is not very easy. There's so much good work being done out there, and we often just wish we could support it all. But I guess to Katie's sort of earlier point, the more that the business broking side of the business earns, the more that we can give to charity. So it's always nice to know that while we are always working and striving to achieve and grow the actual underlying business, that will also come back to help and impact society in a positive way.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you think so. I'm just going to sort of start to wrap up now, but I just wondered whether you've had any good advice that you've received over the years. I mean, you made a good point there about your family saying no one can take your education away. Very good point. What about anything else that you've been told or taught throughout your career that you think could be helpful or insightful to everyone listening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually when I was sort of in my late teens, a very good friend of mine, her father, he had this idea that, as you do when you're a bit younger, that it'd be really fun to own and run a bar. That's what I thought I'd like to do when I was older. And he said to me, and he worked in the property industry, and he said, actually, whatever you decide to do in life, it doesn't matter what it is, whether that's working in a bar, owning a hairdresser, you want to work for a bank, or a doctor, whatever you do, you should be prepared in life to start at the bottom and learn every aspect of that business. And if you do that and you do it well, you will be successful in whatever you do. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So I think at the time, he was sort of saying to me, if you want to own a bar, you've got to be prepared to clean it, be a bartender, work on the accounts and those sorts of things. So I thought that was some great advice.
And you've kind of taken that as well, haven't you? So when you said by moving to Asia, you had to do a bit of everything. But I think in some ways that set you up really well for being a leader, because you know what's involved in every role, so you're better able to support people and lead them. And also in your role as a board director, you have a much better understanding of the business you're trying to manage, because you've done lots of different roles. So you kind of did take that advice, perhaps unknowingly or unintentionally, and did do that in Singapore. So that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. And then the last one, and this is quite a funny one. I think one of the sort of Texel mottos is that it's very important to always treat people with respect. And I always remember, actually, again in my student years, working in it was a bar or a corporate hospitality tent, and you definitely always had two types of people: the people which would talk to you very nicely, like you were doing a job, and were probably aware that you were saving, or you were trying to help fund your university fees, or your rent, or textbooks, or whatever it was. And there are also other people which would talk to you and sort of dismiss you, like, you're just here to serve me, and why aren't you doing this faster? And I always remember a comment that someone said to me, which said, you've always got to be careful who you climb on to get to the top, because you're going to probably meet them on the way back down. And that sort of combined with the treating people with respect, I thought are some really good sort of ground lessons for whatever you end up doing in life. So I don't think you can go wrong if you do that.
Absolutely. Oh God, I completely agree with that. Like, don't burn bridges, treat everyone as you wish to be treated. And we all have a part to play in society. We can't cope without each other. So yeah, interesting. All right. Thank you very much. I think that's you just had a really interesting career and path, and just, I think it's nice for everyone to hear what it's like to move abroad as well, and have that consideration at the back of their mind as well.
Absolutely.
Are there any questions from anyone? I'm just going to open the chat box. If you've got a couple of minutes, if anyone has anything specific they'd like to ask Ashleigh, type away now or unmute yourself and ask.
I'm not scary, I promise. And I'll try and give you an honest answer.
Yeah, or if you think of something later, then you can get a question to us via Miss Ammo, or you can look us up on LinkedIn. We're allowed to connect with you on LinkedIn. So, okay, nothing's coming through, I don't think. It's a bit early over here.
There's one question, but it's from Josefa. I think he sent it to me by accident. He said, would you recommend going abroad?
Yes, definitely. Depends obviously on the country and your ability to be certainly flexible and sociable. I mean, there are certainly times where I was very homesick. I missed my family and my friends, but in the long run, it was a great opportunity and great experience, and it made me have a much broader global perspective than I ever would if I'd stayed only in England. And that is not to say that if you only have your career in England that you will also not have some opportunities to do some short-term travel, but you understand what it's truly like to be part of an international community, and you will meet people from all walks of life with fascinating stories, interesting backgrounds, and hopefully make some friends for life as well. So yes, I definitely would.
And it does go really quickly as well, doesn't it, I would say, because I lived in Singapore for 3 years and it was just over in a blip, and yet we had this amazing experience, but in the grand scheme of things it's a very short part of your life potentially, so it's definitely worth considering. We do have a question that's come through. It said, a couple. How do you try to stay on top of your career as you've gradually moved to the top? How do you keep the game? Is that something you're conscious of, or do you just try to do a good job generally?
At times, I think I'm probably quite conscientious by nature. My husband probably, maybe this is not always a good thing, but sort of one of my own mottos is, why would you settle for second best when you can be the best, or you can try to be the best? So I always think you should strive to do what you can within your remit. So I don't feel that you should settle if you don't have to, but that's a sort of personal thing from my side. There are certainly lots and lots of challenges along the way. I think there was also another question about that, sort of from a female perspective as well. Things like, I don't actually particularly like public speaking that much, particularly if I'm not prepared. And that's something that I've certainly had to overcome. And as you get more senior, you are required to do a bit more of that. You don't have to be, and there are certain situations which I've sort of made known that I'd rather not do that unless I absolutely have to. But I think where I found during my career that perhaps I was going into areas which I felt I wasn't comfortable, I always would mention that to my line manager and sort of say, can I have some more training on this, or what do you think about this? And getting feedback from the people you work with or the people that you report into on a regular basis, as opposed to just like once a year, someone tells you that you're not doing a very good job at X, X, and X. I think it's better to have a bit more of a fluid conversation. So just be aware of perhaps maybe some of your shortfalls. And I think if you do that without being sort of conscious of being on top of your career, hopefully you'll be progressing in the right direction.
Oh, good advice. And then Rachel said, you talked about being the only woman. Did that come with difficulties at time? If so, how did you get through it?
Yeah, We're a very professional organisation at Texel, and to be honest, I think the insurance industry has come a long way from where it was. It was a very male-dominated industry for a long period of time. I think I've tried not to sort of always think, oh, I am a female. There are 5 other males in the room. I just think, you know, we're all professionals. Everyone has a voice to bring to the table. There are sometimes certainly cases where the other members are quite much louder or a bit more forthright than me. So I have had to learn when and how to speak up, I would say. And if the first approach doesn't work, sort of think if you can come at it from a different angle. So certainly not without its challenges. But I think that hopefully the generations above you are paving the way for a more equal sort of shot at lots of different positions and committees as you get older.
Good, great. Thank you. I think that's given a good overview for everyone. Yeah, as I said, if you think of any more questions, send them through, or feel free to link up with Ash on LinkedIn if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. But have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for dialing in to listen to what I had to say, and good luck with all your studies remotely and all your coursework. I'm sure it's been a really challenging year, and thanks again to Katie and Jessica.